This is Wake Up Sunday Morning, brought to you from Celebration Church in Barrie. We are an Anglican Network in Canada congregation. Good morning, I'm Derek Welsman here along with Pastor Brian McVitty. Delighted to be a part of your Sunday morning on this Canada Day long weekend. Toast, coffee, eggs, and maybe some maple syrup this morning. Plus, Wake Up Sunday Morning, a great breakfast combination. Welcome to our Canada Day show. The big news this weekend was the Rolling Stones concert last night at Burroughs Creek, just north of Barrie. And not only are the Rolling Stones in the news, but also the traffic on Highway 11 was tied up for anyone trying to get to Cottage Country or to get parked for the concert. But if the news is filled by an aging rock and roll band from England, this is Canada Day. We are in Canada, and so we are going to focus on what it means to be Canadian. The question we will explore today is, what are Canadian values? What would you list as the key values of being Canadian? To help us explore this topic, here is Pastor Brian McVitty.
Thank you, Derek, and a happy Canada Day to all of our listeners. If you go to Wikipedia and type in Canadian values, the first thing that comes up is a quotation by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Just after taking office as Prime Minister in 2015, he was interviewed by the New York Times. In that interview, he said the following about what it means to be a Canadian and about Canadian values. Prime Minister Trudeau said, "There is no core identity, no mainstream in Canada. There are shared values such as openness, respect, compassion, willingness to work hard, to be there for each other, to search for equality and justice. Those qualities are what make us the first post-national state." End of quote. So I want to ask, does that really sum up who we are as Canadians on this Canada Day weekend? Do we agree that there is no core identity to being a Canadian, and that we're the first post-national state? And if that is true, is that something that we are proud about? That statement by the Prime Minister got me thinking about Canadian values. Surely there is more to being Canadian than what is outlined here. That seems so bland and uninspiring. Therefore, based on what we do as Canadians and what we actually value as Canadians, I began to brainstorm what are key Canadian values. And I've come up with 10 items that are current today. Now, this list is not exhaustive, but I think it says something about what it means to be a Canadian today. Now, let me just add at the outset that I don't think that all of these are positive values. Yes, even on this Canada Day, I'm going to list what I think are some key Canadian values that I don't think are virtues, but which I do think have become Canadian values, whether we like it or not. So, without making very much of a judgment on the following, these are what I would highlight as at least 10 Canadian values, whether we like it or not. Now, later in the show, we will highlight some of the founding biblical values of this country, but for now, let's just look at current Canadian values. Number 1, peacekeepers. Since at least the time of Lester B. Pearson, Canadians have been known for their role as peacekeepers around the world. Number 2 value, warriors. More recently, our armed forces have been involved not just in peacekeeping, but as combat troops. This was the case in Afghanistan, where we fought alongside a multi-nation force against the Taliban in Afghanistan. And then earlier this month, on June the 6th, we marked the 75th anniversary of D-Day, when Canadian troops landed in Normandy to drive the Nazi army out of Europe. Let me just add that on June the 6th, one of the members of our congregation, Deborah Marshall, was on Juno Beach for the Canadian ceremonies. Value number 3, environmental protection. I'm not sure how we compare to other nations, but certainly the environment is important for Canadians. Most of us have an affinity for the wilderness forests and lakes of this country, and certainly environmental protection is important to all of us. Value number 4, justice. Canada is viewed by many as a nation that has a well-functioning justice system. Canadians value our fair and impartial justice system. Further to this, there have been great attempts at reconciliation with First Nations people in Canada. Earlier this month, the final report was presented by the Commission on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. There is a serious attempt for there to be justice and for there to be lasting, meaningful reconciliation with First Nations people. Number 5, multicultural. It is perhaps beyond obvious that Canada has been and continues to be a multicultural nation. Most of us can trace our roots back to immigrants. In addition to those who came here as immigrants, there's been many who have come here as refugees. Value number 6, abortion. We are the only G7 Western nation in the world that has absolutely no legislation in place concerning abortion. There is no protection for babies in the womb, not even late-term babies coming up to 9 months. And it seems impossible for us as Canadians to be able to have a conversation about this issue. Number 7, marijuana. Last October, marijuana became legal coast to coast. We are one of the first countries to have easy and legal access to marijuana. We are a country that is increasing in its use of drugs of all kinds. Number 8, gambling. The availability and attraction of gambling is increasing. Here in the Greater Toronto Area, Woodbine Racetrack has been expanded and is advertising over a wide area, including throughout Simcoe County. In Pickering, there is an even larger casino and hotel development, which is in the final stages of approval. Number 9, Christian universities and colleges. While many, if not most, of the universities and colleges in Canada were founded as Christian institutions of higher learning, the ability of a university to be distinctly Christian today is under attack. This past year, Trinity Western University in British Columbia, which is a private Christian university, was prevented by the Supreme Court of Canada from establishing a law school. This is because Trinity Western is a Christian institution and they uphold the biblical definition of marriage as being between a man and a woman. And number 10 in our list, the gay loonie. This month you may have found in your loose change a new design for the Canadian loonie, which features 2 men kissing. Canada was one of the first countries to change the definition of marriage and allow gay marriage. So, leaving aside hockey and Tim Hortons, can we leave those aside? Well, let's for the moment. These then are 10 values that are in the news today, and I think speak about who we are as a nation. I've not really commented on any of them. I've just stated what they are. And as I said at the beginning, I think some of them are positive values, and I think some of them are not so positive values. But nevertheless, these are key values for Canada as we mark Canada Day 2019.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in all thy sons command, with glowing hearts we see
those are 10 values which say something about what it means to be a Canadian in 2019, let's turn now to the founding values of this country. What were the values that laid the foundation for this country, enabling us to become this peaceful, prosperous, democratic country that we all love so deeply today? On the Canadian coat of arms, there are 2 verses of Scripture. Let's take a few moments to consider the significance of these Bible references and what they have to say about our country and what it means to be a Canadian.
The first of these Bible references is Psalm 72, verse 8. This verse is prominently set directly under the Canadian coat of arms. Now, as you may know, at the time of Confederation, there was a debate as to whether Canada would be called a kingdom or a republic, as Sir Leonard Tilley, Premier of New Brunswick, was instrumental in giving the Dominion of Canada its name as a dominion. The story goes that as St. Leonard Tilley's custom was, he read a chapter from the Bible each morning, and that particular morning he read Psalm 72. When reading verse 8 of that psalm, which says, "He shall have dominion from sea to sea," the Premier thought, what a splendid name to give to Canada. So when he went back to the convention that morning, he suggested the word Dominion as the name for Canada. That was universally agreed to, and Canada is called the Dominion of Canada. And so Canada is a dominion due to the influence of Premier Leonard Tilley, who was inspired by Psalm 72. So what does this verse, and indeed the whole of Psalm 72, say about Canada? A little background. This is a psalm written by King Solomon and was used at the coronation of his successors when they were crowned as King of Israel. This psalm is a prayer asking that the new king would rule wisely, that there would be justice for all people, that it would be a time of prosperity under this new king, and that the nation would have renown in all the world. It's a prayer that the new king would see that the poor are taken care of, and this psalm is a prayer asking that the new king would have a long life. This is a wonderful prayer for any government and any nation. However, there is more to Psalm 72. The new king is described in such superlative terms that this psalm has always been viewed by Jews and Christians alike as being messianic. The king described here and his kingdom must be the Messiah and his coming reign upon the earth. Therefore, when the psalm says, "May he have dominion from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth," this is a description of the reign of the Messiah over the whole earth and all the nations. And then in verse 11 we read, "May all the kings fall down before him, and all the nations serve him." Therefore, the inscription of Psalm 72, verse 8 on our Canadian coat of arms, "May he have dominion from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth," is both a prayer that Jesus would reign over this land, and it is a declaration that Jesus does have dominion as the reigning Messiah. The other verse in our Canadian coat of arms is from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 16, which reads, "They desire a better country." The sequence of events leading to having this verse placed on our Canadian coat of arms goes back to the days of Prime Minister Lester Pearson. John Matheson was a cabinet minister in the government of Lester Pearson, and he was charged with setting up the Order of Canada. Matheson heard a sermon on Hebrews 11:16, and he was inspired to suggest this verse as the motto for the new Order of Canada. Now, it was somewhat comical when the government issued the press release announcing the new motto for the Order of Canada. In the press release, they listed the new motto not as Hebrews 11:16, but there was a typo and it was listed as Hebrews 12:16, which reads, "Let no one be immoral or irreligious like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal." End of quote. Well, the press had great fun with that error. Let me just read all of Hebrews 11:16, which is the motto for the Order of Canada. "But as it is, they desire a better country, that is a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city." Now this verse, as you may know, is speaking about Abraham, who stepped out in faith in response to God's call, and who was looking forward to the fulfillment of God's promises, which did not happen in his lifetime, but only came to fruition with the coming of Jesus the Messiah. The country described here and the city that is mentioned in this verse are both established by God on his foundations. Now, I thought this was an interesting insight. One scholar has contrasted this verse from Hebrews chapter 11 with Genesis chapter 11. Genesis 11:4 says, quote, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves." End of quote. Which, as you may know, refers to the Tower of Babel in the city that man built according to his own values. I think it could be said that Canada today is in the midst of a tug between its founding vision as a country built on God's foundations, as described in Hebrews chapter 11, versus a city built by man and his own corrupt values, as described in Genesis chapter 11 with the building of the Tower of Babel. So we have two verses of Scripture on our Canadian coat of arms. The first is Psalm 72, verse 8, and the next is Hebrews 11:16. The first speaks about the dominion of God and the reign of the Messiah. The second speaks of Abraham's faith in God and the heavenly country and the new Jerusalem that would be his final destination. Therefore, I think it's false to say that there is no core identity for Canada. And I would further add that many of us have no desire to be the first post-national state. God has done something amazing in Canada, and this is worth celebrating on Canada Day 2019.
To conclude today's Canada Day show with our focus on Canadian values, we thought it appropriate to highlight our Canadian values as seen in the life of one remarkable Canadian. Is there a Canadian who has lived in such a way as to embody the best of our Canadian values? This is someone I did not know very much about, but is very worthwhile highlighting today.
2 months ago, Jean Vanier died at the age of 90. What a remarkable person. I quote from Father Raymond de Souza in the National Post for the following. Jean Vanier was the son of Georges and Pauline Vanier. Georges Vanier, as you may remember, was Governor General of Canada. So his son, Jean Vanier, had every opportunity and privilege growing up as the son of the Governor General at Rideau Hall in Ottawa. However, in 1964, Jean Vanier sensed that God was calling him to give his life to care for those with developmental disabilities. Inspired by his own Christian faith, he invited 2 disabled men to come and live with him in a ramshackle house where conditions were austere. There was no electricity, no indoor plumbing. In time, others came to join them, and so Jean Vanier called this home L'Arche, meaning the Ark. It was designed to be a home that he provided to the developmentally disabled. He would often remark that we desire a cure, but we often forget to care. For those with developmental disabilities, there usually is no cure, but the need for care certainly remains. L'Arche homes are not intended to be efficient institutions that offer high-quality care. They are designed to be genuine communities in which all residents have gifts to offer, lives to be shared, and love to be given. Now, Jean Vanier was not a holy simpleton. Instead, he was a gifted author who wrote dozens of books on theology, philosophy, and spirituality. And he was able to institutionalize his vision of communities animated by Christian love so that there are now 154 residential communities in nearly 40 countries. And there are 29 L'Arche homes in Canada, including ones in Toronto, Hamilton, and Richmond Hill. Those who saw in Jean Vanier something of Mother Teresa were not wrong. Vanier explained how ordinary people could live out the same spirit of L'Arche. He said, "Try and find somebody who is lonely, and when you go to see them, they will see you as the Messiah. Go and visit an old lady who has no friends and no family. Take her flowers. People will say to me, but that's nothing. It is nothing, but it's also everything. It always begins with the small little things. After all, it all began in Bethlehem, and that was pretty small." End of quote. I would say that Jean Vanier embodied some of the very best values of what it means to be a Canadian. We are better because of him. The world is better because of him. If the world needs more Canada, then it needs more people like Jean Vanier. So in conclusion, Premier Leonard Tilley was captivated by a vision of Canada as a dominion, as described in Psalm 72, where the reign of the Messianic King is evident and brings blessings to all. Cabinet Minister John Matheson was inspired by a sermon on Abraham on Hebrews chapter 11, and he suggested that verse 16 be the motto of the Order of Canada, which is awarded to the very best of our citizens. Abraham was guided by a holy hope focused on God. These 2 Bible verses are permanently inscribed on the coat of arms of Canada. They are not there by chance, and they are not there as mere decoration. They are there because they speak of who we are at our very best. Those 2 Bible verses inspired 2 God-fearing Canadians who had a vision of a God-honoring country. These are the solid foundational values that are worthy of a great country, of an enduring country, of a country worth loving. These are not shallow values which blow away with the winds of time. These are the values we celebrate on Canada Day 2019.
I have felt the wind upon my face on this Atlantic shore, and in the west I've stood and watched the noble eagle soar, and I have seen the fields of gold and green and yellow too, and known the majesty of mountains touching skies of blue, and my heart's overwhelmed for this nation that I love. This is my song for Canada. A song for unity and a song for freedom. Oh Lord our God, may your healing come, and may the walls that divide us no longer stand. Oh Lord, our God, heal our land. In the color of the northern lights, would leap and dance and sing in the stillness of the forest when the snow melts in the spring, in the beauty of the muskeg that is red and golden brown, in the quiet expectations of the city before dawn, and my heart's overwhelmed for this nation that I love. This is my song for Canada. A song for unity and a song for freedom. Oh Lord our God, may your healing come, and may the walls that divide us no longer stand. Oh Lord, our God, heal our land.
This has been a special Canada Day edition of Wake Up Sunday Morning. Please take a few moments today to pray for this great country and for its leaders. Be sure to join us next Sunday morning at 8 for Wake Up Sunday Morning. I'm Derek Welsman on behalf of Pastor Brian and everyone at Celebration Church in Barrie. Have a blessed Canada Day weekend.